So here we are in the next part of this damned Opteron build. Now, when I started this build, I was originally going to make it a Xeon build. I ended up switching to this Opteron board because, well, it was a lower power method and it fits into a normal case, and I went, well, okay, I got it at a reasonable price. It's still 8 cores. The previous system was dual quad core, so it worked out to be the same. I just figured this would be an interesting thing to do because I've never really worked with AMD chips that much, at least not recently. This whole thing with Super Micro going back and forth, trying to figure out why this system won't boot with either my 4200 series chip or the 4300 series chip. It just went on forever. I mean, there must have been 20 plus emails between us. And I sent the board in. Based on stuff I read, I figured out that version 1.0 BIOSes only support the 4100 series, 2.0, 4200, and 3.0, 4300. And when I sent it to AMD, or sorry, when I sent the board in to Super Micro, they stated in their sheet, reflashed BIOS. So I went, okay, so they've updated it. And I even asked them via email why the 4200 series won't work. Because at the time I didn't realize that you needed a 2.0 BIOS. I was under the impression all motherboards supported the 4200. Now, the person at Supermicro said, you're right. When I asked, is our BIOS update needed? They said a BIOS update is needed for the 4300, but they told me in an email 4200s are supported by all boards and by all BIOS versions. He went on to say that it's only the 4300s that require a BIOS update, and there's no reason why your system should not be working with a version, with a 4200 series chip. So, going on that information, I figured the chip was dead. That's why I bought the 4300. Buy the 4300, still doesn't work. Go back and forth. They're telling me all sorts of stuff. He even had me take a picture of this sheet and send it to them, because apparently they didn't have any records of it. But when I was looking at the sheet, I mean, there were some problems with it. Like, one, it says an i5 was used, which obviously is not the case. It's an AMD Opteron board. And one thing that stood out, BIOS version installed 1.1. Now, the question was that a mistake? Did they just copy over all this stuff and this is just like, it was just like a boilerplate that they forgot to change, or what? Well, I asked what version of the BIOS is installed on my board. And the person told me it's 1.1. The reason being, this is actually an OEM board. So they only support version 1.0 series or 1X series on the OEM boards, despite the fact that the retail boards accept BIOSes up to version, I believe the current one's 3.5. So they also said that it only supports the 4100 series chips, and there was no support whatsoever for the 42 or 4300 series. So I went out and I bought a 4105 CPU, which is a quad-core 1.2 gigahertz AMD Opteron, for $7. And I picked it up. Now, because they said it's not supported, you have to like translate from company speak into real life. Company speak, that means they sell this board to companies like, let's say, Dell or Apple or whatever. I mean, any company that wants to put this system into a case, basically, or rebrand it. And they offer a certain level of support with that purchase. Now, often what happens is OEM support is different from retail support, because this is going into like an enterprise situation where they need reliability, they need things to be fully tested, and things are verified, you know, like, oh, does this BIOS version work properly under all these flavors of Linux? Does it work under FreeBSD? Does it work under Windows? All this stuff. I knew that you could flash the BIOS from 1 to 3 and then gain support for all the chips. But they're telling me the hardware only supports it. So with the 4105 in hand, I boot it up. System works just great. The side effect of running the 4105 is that they are ridiculously slow. I actually I did install Windows on this machine, well, on a spare drive, and I started it up, and it took forever to boot. And yeah, keep in mind, this is my first experience with an AMD Opteron. I don't know how fast these things are. I booted it up, blah, 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 and I started running some benchmarks. And it became apparent that the AMD Opteron series, at least these ones, the Bulldozer and Pile Driver, I don't remember what series the 4100 is, it's something along those lines. But anyway, this series, man, they just suck for anything that, like, the main reason why I want this thing is a system that I can do rendering on while my computer's freed up. That's the justification I came up with for building it. And these chips are just so slow. I was running just Cinebench R15, the newest one, just the CPU test, just to get a rough idea of their speeds. And yeah, it became very apparent how slow these chips are. But I wanted to try out my new 4200 and 4300 chips. Turns out, they all work. So, the combination of Super Micro telling me it's not supported, well, first they told me that the 4200 should work. So I would never have bought a 4300 if I didn't hear that, because I would have just thought, oh, I need the BIOS update to use it. And then they start telling me the hardware doesn't support it, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, it's basically a certification issue where they don't want to certify the newer BIOSes on an older system, or sorry, on an OEM board. So the retail one does support 3.5, and I just put the 4100 series in and ran the BIOS update like you normally would, and it updated to 3.5 with no problems. This is actually running the 4200 series right now. Like I said, I did some benchmarks with Cinebench. Now, this graph is showing my home systems, like the current ones. One I'm missing is I should unplug my router and boot it into Windows and then try it, because it's a dual atom with hyperthreading. So just to see how fast that would be, I think I'll have to add that to my master list. But this chart is showing the number one spot is my current system. Now this doesn't show overclocks. The rated speed of 3.5 gigahertz is shown. My system's running at, I think, 4.3 or 4.2 gigahertz. I can't remember. And the system below in the number 2 spot is, I'm running a i7 3777K, as you can see. The one below is my wife's i5, the 4690, which is a newer Haswell part. As you can see, they're overclocked to the same speed, I think. Now that I think about it, I think they're 4.2 gigahertz. Mine has an advantage simply because it has hyperthreading, giving it that 4 extra virtual cores, and it lets it just better organize and work on the task. So, despite the fact that her system is technically faster at the same clock speed because she's using a newer Haswell part, my system still beats it by a bit. Anyway, moving down, we have the 4-core, well, I'm going to call them 8-core because AMD markets them as 8-core. It's a little more complex than that. We'll get into that in a second. But the 8-core, 2.8 gigahertz, 4280, as you can see, is easily defeated by even my wife's system. And it would be easily defeated by it at stock speed. So right away, that tells me these are not very powerful for a supposed 8-core system. Now, we drop down to the newer 4332HE chip, which is 6 cores at 3 gigahertz. And I was curious if the newer architecture and the faster clock speed could actually make up for the lack of 2 cores, and it can't. So, oh well. Moving a little further down to the number 5 spot, we've got my cheapest of cheap, well, not super cheap, but i5 Haswell-based 4330 dual core with hyperthreading at 3.5 gigahertz CPU from our TV computer, which pretty much holds its own against the Opteron, which is kind of sad considering it's only 2 cores. But yeah, and then way at the bottom there is the 4 core 1.2 gigahertz 4105 chip, which just gets absolutely massacred by everything. So, one, why are these chips so bad at this task? It comes down to, I'm going to refer to this as hyperthreading. Technically, AMD chips, these ones don't use it. They use something called cluster multiprocessor, some crap, like it's some other name. Essentially what hyperthreading is, it was introduced by Intel a long time ago. If you have a single core chip, it will identify itself as 2 logical cores to the operating system with hyperthreading. And the purpose of this is basically so it can schedule stuff better. I mean, that's essentially what it does. There is no actual second core. If you're talking about like one of the first Xeons and stuff, there is no second core, but it shows up as a dual CPU system. And it's basically so another thread can run and be better optimized. It can basically sort stuff out. I believe newer designs from Intel, hyperthreading does allow it to complete certain tasks despite the fact that it doesn't have a core. So you can, the system will schedule stuff into the hyper-threaded cores that it knows it can either complete in a short amount of time or blah, 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 something that's it's capable of computing on its own. It's pretty complicated. Wikipedia has a fairly detailed article on it, and I'm sure like Ars Technica and stuff have detailed articles on it too somewhere. But, I mean, essentially what it does is it lets it run additional threads at the same time despite only having the hardware to run half that. Now, i5s on the newer, most i5s don't have hyperthreading. That's why my wife's system in the number 2 slot shows up as 4 cores, 4 threads, instead of 4 cores, 8 threads like mine. The Opterons in the Bulldozer, Pile Driver, what have you series have dual cores. They are, like, it's hyper-threaded in the same sense that you can see that Cinebench is referring to the 42 and 4300 series as 3-core 6-thread and 4-core 8-thread. It's not really that simple because although they do, in a way, have dual chips, they really do have those 8 cores, not chips, cores. They really do have those 8 cores. System is capable of executing 8 threads of integers, meaning whole numbers like 5 plus 4. It does not have a dual floating point unit to make up for the like this dual individual core nature of it. So there's 8 threads of integers, but 4 threads of floating point, which is decimal math, like 6.9 times 5.3. Because of this limitation, things like Cinebench and Handbrake, which use a lot of floating point math to do video encoding and rendering and stuff like that, are horribly destroyed by these fake cores. You actually have to make sure your Windows is fully up to date. There's actually a patch for both 7 and 8, I believe, that allow Windows to understand what the hell these crippled cores are and how to schedule things properly. Before, it was just horrible. It was like dumping all this work onto the first 2 cores, but it shouldn't, because the first 2 cores are the same cluster. So what it needed to do was schedule it to the first core of every cluster if it wanted to properly distribute the workload. And then if you get more intelligent, you would send all the integer data to the second core so that the floating point units are full of the first half of the... It's complicated and it's ridiculous. It's a stupid architecture. Its one advantage is, I guess, it's really good at web serving, because my understanding is web serving generally just does integer math, so it's not really that complex a task for it to complete. And they made 12-core and 16-core versions of these in a different socket, and they're horrible. I mean, for this type of job, they're horrible, and it's just not going to work. I mean, I would rather use the extra power of the Intel chips, which have the option of letting me run it as a Hackintosh, which would actually be useful to me so I don't have to dual boot on my main system. So I think what's going to happen is I'm going to move back to the Intel plant. So I have a choice. I can either mod the case with a Dremel to accept the giant AMD board, which I did a previous video, or sorry, the giant Intel board. Let me grab it, it's heavy. Ugh. This guy. Dun, dun, dun. Anyway, I can either mod the case to accept this giant board, or I can get a slightly different board and sell that one. So what I decided on is I purchased a different board, the X7DCA-L, off eBay for like 35 bucks. It will accept the same chips I have. It will accept the same heat sinks I have. It is a slightly smaller board. They advertise it sort of as a micro ATX. Its physical stats on the page say it's an ATX board because it technically violates the mini ATX specification. It should fit in the case with little to no mods. I may have to just get little standoffs for it. It's a smaller board because it loses some of the slots. It no longer has the additional PCI slots. It has a PCI 32-bit, two 8x size slots. One I think runs at 4 electrically, and a 16x slot. Had I kept the older board, the problem with the older board is it only has 8x slots, which means either you have to mod the motherboard by cutting the back off the connector, and that will allow a longer video card to sit into the socket. The problem with this particular board, the other one, is that there's not enough physical room behind it. There's stuff taking up the space, so you can't put it in. And another problem is, well, you can also mod the card. You can cut the connector off the card, but then, then your card is crippled permanently. You may upgrade your stuff in the future, and, you can't resell it, that kind of stuff. So, the advantage of this other board is that it allows a 16x card while using the chips I have, and then, I can sell old memory and all that stuff. So, I decided to go with the board. I'm waiting for it. It just shipped today. I will make another video. The future videos will be called something like Intel Dual Xeon build, something along those lines. Technically, you can think of it as this extension of this build. Everything that I will do in the newer videos dealing with the Intel board are applicable to this. It's going to be me building the exact same computer, except it will be a different motherboard. The exception being AMD chips don't really run Hackintosh systems too well, so therefore all the Mac OS stuff, if I show it, wouldn't be part of the AMD build. It would just be a strictly Windows machine. So, that pretty much brings this to an end. I'm going to put this on eBay because I'm sure someone can use it. For my purposes, I don't like it. I want something that can render a video, and this thing sucks at rendering video. It works fine as a regular computer. As I showed, I had Windows running on it. It worked great. No problems at all. One thing I'd like to note is if I was going to keep this as a normal machine, like something I use, I would change this fan back to the stock fan. this Noctua fan is great. I don't even hear it, and Noctua makes the best fans ever. The problem with this particular fan that I'm using is that it's not designed for high air pressure, or static pressure, as they say. This is designed as a case fan, so it's designed to move a lot of air, but not strong. It's, you know what I mean? Like it's moving just a volume of air, but it's not forcing it through as strong as it could. That means the tight grill of this heatsink is just acting as like a wall, and it's bouncing a lot of the air back. I can actually feel air being pushed away from the fan because it's not making it into the heatsink. It's bouncing it back out. But the Dynatron fan that came with this has a much stronger force to it, so it can push the air through the grill without it just all being wasted out here. So I would make that change at the cost of it making a bit more noise. It would just cool it more effectively. This thing was actually staying fairly cool, even under Cinebench with the 8 cores running. I don't think I went above 55 or 60 degrees Celsius, which is pretty good considering how hot this room is. I mean, the room at the time was like 30 degrees Celsius, so yeah, it's not too bad. It's a pretty decent cooler, actually, for something that's made completely out of aluminum. So, the next video is going to continue the build, and it's going to be an Intel board, because AMD let me down. I know that AMD fanboys will be upset, but this is not convincing me AMD made good chips at any point in their history, aside from the early Athlons and stuff like that, when they actually were significantly better than Intel. Yes, I know, especially modern chips, I know they're cheaper. I know they have much cheaper motherboards. Intel motherboards generally cost a lot more than an AMD motherboard for the chipset and everything. At least in New York, especially where you pay a ton of electricity cost per kilowatt, it's just not worth it. You spend so much money on the power that these stupid like 200 watt systems use. But yeah, my Xeon's going to use that much, so we'll see. Another little side note is, this, by the way, this system pulls 120 watts using this crappy video card. I did purchase a good video card in which to use on it. Dun dun dun. This is an AMD, it's an Asus manufactured AMD 6950 2 gig memory. I bought it for like $40 and it doesn't work. The video card is screwed up. The memory specifically, it's causing lines and stuff to display. I feel bad. Like, on one hand, I want to return it to the guy because I bought it used working from someone on eBay. But it was also over a month ago. It took me so long to get this stupid system working, I never bothered to check the card. So finally, when I did check the card, I was rather disappointed. I noticed that when I got the card, the front of it was bent. So my first thought was that some of the ball grid array chips, such as the video memory, have popped off slightly. But I hit it with my heat gun and my hot air rework gun, and it's still doing it. And maybe I have to, I'm kind of cautious about it. I haven't really majorly heated the thing up, so maybe I'll do that at some point and just give it another try and fix it. Because I don't feel right trying to return it after over a month, despite the fact I could actually contact the guy or eBay and file a complaint, but I just feel bad about that. So I am willing to accept it based on the fact that I did not contact him or test it. So yeah, I will see you in, I guess, what will be part 1 of the new series.